I learned exactly where I ranked in my family the night my dad lifted his glass at dinner and said, "Congrats, here's your car, son." Everyone clapped. Then he turned to me, lowered his voice, and handed me a bill instead of a smile. Rent, due by Sunday. In that moment, years of quiet favoritism snapped into focus. I smiled, swallowed it, and said nothing, but something inside me packed its bags. What happened next didn't explode at the table. It unfolded later and left my entire family unraveling. Before I get into it, tap like tell me where you're listening from and share your advice matters. My name is Sarah, and on paper, I look like the kid parents are supposed to brag about. I work in social services, the kind of job where you sit across from people on their worst days and try to steady the ground under their feet. I learned early how to stay calm, how to listen, how to hold things together when emotions run high. Funny thing is, I learned most of that skill set at home. Our house always looked solid from the outside. Neatly trimmed lawn, family photos lined up in matching frames, Sunday dinners that started on time. My dad built his career with his hands, turning long days and stubborn pride into a business that paid the bills and demanded respect. My mom taught young kids came home smelling faintly of crayons and coffee and believed peace was something you preserved by not poking at cracks. And then there was my brother. He's younger charming in an effortless way, the kind of person people forgive before he even asks. Growing up, it felt like we lived under the same roof but played by different rules. When he struggled, the house leaned toward him. When I succeeded, it was treated like background noise, nice expected already accounted for. I don't remember anyone ever sitting me down to say, "We expect more from you." They didn't have to. It was in the silences, in the way my report cards were skimmed while his were discussed. In the way my choices were questioned while his were encouraged. I became the reliable one, the helper, the problem solver, the person who filled in gaps without being asked. After college, I moved back home with a plan: save money, get experience, apply to graduate programs. I paid for groceries sometimes, covered bills when something broke, picked up slack without keeping score. Living there wasn't meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be practical, temporary. My mom liked to say, "Your dad just trusts you more," as if trust explained why responsibility only flowed one direction, as if being capable meant you no longer needed support. I told myself it didn't bother me, that families are complicated, that love shows up in different forms. I believed that if I stayed steady long enough, things would even out, that someday my dad would look at me and see not just the dependable daughter, but someone worth celebrating too. That belief is what I carried into the summer of my brother's graduation. The heat, the long days, the feeling that something was shifting even if I didn't yet know how sharply. And looking back now, that's the part that hurts the most. I walked into that dinner still thinking I belonged. The weeks leading up to my brother's graduation felt off in a way I couldn't quite name. The house buzzed with planning energy, but none of it included me in any meaningful way. My mom talked nonstop about the guest list and menu ideas, flipping through recipes at the kitchen counter. My dad disappeared into the garage more often than usual, the door always shut, his voice dropping whenever I walked past. When I asked simple questions what time people were coming, whether we needed more chairs, I got vague answers. "We've got it covered." I told myself I was imagining things. The day of the graduation arrived hot and bright, the kind of summer Saturday that makes everything feel amplified. I helped clean the house, wiped down the dining table, arranged flowers my mom insisted were necessary. My brother paced around in his cap and gown, nervous but excited. I straightened his collar without thinking, the same way I had done 100 times before, big moments in his life. At the ceremony, my dad clapped louder than anyone when my brother's name was called. He stood up halfway beaming like this was a personal victory. I clapped too genuinely proud, even as a small familiar ache settled in my chest. I remembered my own graduations, how my dad had shown up technically present already, checking his phone by the time my name was announced. Back home, the house filled quickly. Relatives, neighbors, family, friends. Laughter bounced off the walls. Plates clinked. Someone turned on music. I floated between rooms, refilling drinks, answering questions about work, smiling when people congratulated my brother. The garage door stayed closed the entire time, like it was guarding a secret. Dinner was loud and crowded. My dad stood at the head of the table, glass raised, waiting for the room to settle. He talked about hard work, about perseverance, about how not everyone has it easy, but the ones who push through deserve recognition. I noticed the way his words leaned toward my brother, how his hand rested on his shoulder. Then he pulled out the keys. They caught the light when he held them up, metal flashing, unmistakable. A car. A big one. Worth more than I had ever spent on myself at once. The room erupted. Chairs scraped back. People cheered. My brother's face froze for a second before breaking into pure shock. I clapped. I smiled. My hands did exactly what they were supposed to do. After the noise died down, after people drifted toward the garage to see the car up close, my dad caught my eye and nodded toward the hallway. Just a quick conversation, the look said. Nothing dramatic. In the quiet of the kitchen, away from the applause, his tone changed. Practical. Measured. Like we were discussing a schedule. "You've been here a while," he said. "It's time you start paying rent. $900. By Sunday." For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. The timing was so surreal it didn't register as real. I looked past him toward the garage where my brother was laughing, hands on the steering wheel of a brand new car. Something clicked into place then. Not anger yet, not heartbreak, just clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a line being drawn, and for the first time I realized I had been standing on the wrong side of it my entire life. The rest of the night moved around me like I wasn't really in it. People laughed in the garage, admiring the car from every angle. Someone popped open another bottle. My brother kept saying, "I can't believe this," over and over, like repeating it might make it permanent. I stood near the kitchen sink, rinsing plates that didn't need rinsing, nodding, when someone spoke to me, waiting for the feeling in my chest to pass. It didn't. When the house finally quieted down and the last car pulled out of the driveway, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. $900. By Sunday. The number echoed in my head not because I couldn't afford it, but because of what it meant. It wasn't about money. It was a verdict. I thought about all the payments I'd covered without being asked. Groceries, repairs, bills that mysteriously landed on my plate because I was better with this stuff. None of that had been rent, apparently. That was something reserved for moments like this. Moments when I needed to be reminded of my place. Sleep didn't come. Sometime after midnight, I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank account. Years of careful savings stared back at me. Enough to move. Enough to breathe. Enough to stop negotiating my worth one quiet favor at a time. In the morning, the house was already buzzing again. My dad and brother were making plans for a drive. My mom hovered, cheerful, in that brittle way she got when she wanted things to feel normal. No one mentioned the conversation from the night before. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I waited until they left. The quiet that followed was heavy but clean. I started with my closet, folding clothes into neat piles. Each decision felt oddly calm. What to take? What to leave? I skipped the things tied to old versions of myself, the ones who believed patience would eventually be rewarded. At my desk, I paused with a pen in my hand, staring at a blank piece of paper. I didn't write an essay. I didn't argue my case. I kept it simple, honest, final. I'm moving out. I'm taking responsibility for my life fully. Please don't look for me until I reach out. I folded the note once and placed it on the fridge, held down by a magnet that had been there for years. Then I carried my bags to the car and didn't look back. The pushback didn't come right away. It started as silence. Then a text from my brother asking if this was some kind of joke. Then missed calls from my mom. By the time I pulled onto the highway, my phone buzzed again and again in the passenger seat. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted revenge. But because for the first time I was choosing not to explain myself to people who had already decided what I was worth, and that choice changed everything. I didn't go far that first night. I drove until the streetlights blurred together, then parked in a grocery store lot that stayed open late, the kind with buzzing lights and carts rattling in the distance. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, breathing in short bursts, trying to understand how a single sentence could hollow out so many years at once. $900 by Sunday. It replayed in my head, tangled with the image of my brother's smile in the garage, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he was afraid someone might take it back. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would have been easier. What I felt instead was something colder, a realization settling into place piece by piece. My phone lit up again. My brother's name. "Are you okay?" the text read. Mom's freaking out. Dad says you overreacted. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it and setting the phone face down. I didn't owe anyone an immediate version of myself, not tonight. I stayed with my best friend that first week. She didn't ask many questions, just handed me a spare key, cleared out a drawer, and said, "Stay as long as you need." The simplicity of it almost made me cry. No lectures, no conditions, just space. The messages kept coming, from my mom mostly. Long voicemails that swung between worry and accusation. She wanted to talk this through. She wanted me to come home so we could be a family again. She never mentioned the rent, never mentioned the timing, as if ignoring it might erase what had been said. My dad didn't call at first. When he did, it was brief, controlled. "This is unnecessary," he said. "Adults don't storm off." I almost laughed at that. I hadn't stormed. I had packed quietly. I had left a note. If anything, it was the calmest decision I'd ever made. A few days later, my brother called. Not texted, called. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice sounded thinner than usual, less sure of itself. We met at a coffee shop halfway between my friend's place and the house. Neutral ground. He showed up early, tapping his foot phone in hand like a lifeline. I didn't know he said as soon as I sat down, about the rent thing. Dad didn't say anything. "I know," I said. And I meant it. None of this was his doing. He leaned back, rubbing his face. "Everything's weird at home. Mom keeps crying. Dad's mad all the time. And now they're asking me about stuff you used to handle. Bills, appointments, things I don't even know where to start with." I watched him process that out loud, watched the confusion creep in. For the first time, the cushion under him was gone. "I'm not disappearing," I told him. "I'm just not doing it for everyone anymore." He nodded slowly, like the idea scared him, but also made sense. That conversation stayed with me because it was the moment I understood the real shift had already happened. I didn't have to do anything dramatic. The system was unraveling on its own. The real confrontation came later. Not at the dinner table, not in the garage, but on a quiet afternoon when my dad showed up at my friend's place unannounced. I opened the door and found him standing there, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. He looked around like the small apartment offended him. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat across from each other, the space between us charged with everything that had been left unsaid. He didn't waste time. "You embarrassed us?" he said. "You made a scene." "I left quietly," I replied. "That's not a scene. You blindsided us." I held his gaze. "You handed me a rent demand at my brother's celebration. That was the blind side." He waved it off. "That's business. You're an adult. Adults pay their way. And yet I said you bought him a car worth more than I've ever spent on myself. That's different." I waited. Let the silence do the work. "He needed encouragement," my dad said finally. "You've always been fine on your own." There it was again, the familiar script. "So because I handle things I get less," I asked. He sighed like I was exhausting him. "You're comparing apples and oranges." I leaned forward. "No, I'm comparing effort and reward. I'm comparing responsibility and support. And I'm asking why those only flow one direction." He hesitated, just for a second. Then he said it, "Because he's worth it." The words landed heavy and clean, with no apology wrapped around them. For a moment, I felt something crack open inside me. Not pain, relief. Because the question I'd been asking my entire life finally had an honest answer. I stood up. "I'm not here to argue with you," I said. I just needed to hear that. Hear what he snapped. "That I was never going to win," I said calmly. "Not by being responsible. Not by being patient. Not by staying." He frowned. "You're twisting this." "No," I said. "I'm accepting it." I walked him to the door. He looked stunned, like he'd expected tears or yelling, some kind of leverage. "You're really going to do this?" he asked. "Walk away over money." I shook my head. I walked away over clarity. After that, the calls escalated. My mom called sobbing. My brother texted in all caps, panicking about things falling apart. And then my dad started calling every number he had for me, over and over. From his phone, from my mom's, from the house line. I let them ring. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. In the weeks that followed, I watched the consequences unfold from a distance. My brother struggled with expectations he'd never had to meet before. My mom grew quieter, more careful, forced to confront how often she'd smoothed things over instead of standing up. And my dad, who had always controlled the rhythm of our family, lost that control completely. He didn't know how to fix things without issuing commands. Meanwhile, my life settled into something steady. I found my own place. I focused on work. People noticed. My supervisor trusted me with more responsibility. I started being recognized not as someone's daughter, but as myself. One night, my phone buzzed again. A message from my dad. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I typed back impact matters more than intent. He didn't reply. That was the moment I knew the confrontation was over. Not because he apologized, not because everything was repaired, but because I no longer needed him to understand in order to move forward. The power had shifted quietly, irrevocably, and the family I left behind would never operate the same way again. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, uneven and uncomfortable, like a house settling after a quiet earthquake. My brother cracked first. Without me smoothing things over, reminding him of deadlines, explaining expectations, he floundered. He called more than once, voice tight, admitting he felt overwhelmed. Not angry, not entitled, just scared. For the first time, he was standing where I had always stood, expected to figure things out without applause. I helped when I could, but I didn't step back into the role of buffer. That space stayed empty on purpose. My mom changed more slowly. She stopped leaving frantic voicemails and started sending short messages instead. Apologies slipped in between updates about the house. She didn't name the favoritism outright, but she no longer pretended everything was fine. When we met for coffee weeks later, she looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Quieter, more honest. I realized my absence had forced her to sit with discomfort she'd spent years avoiding. My dad was the last to adjust. Losing control didn't make him softer right away. It made him smaller. He ran out of orders to give consequences to threaten. Without my reliability to lean on his authority stopped working the way it used to. He reached out less often, and when he did, his words were careful, measured. Like he was learning a language he'd never bothered with before. As for me, life stabilized in ways I hadn't expected. My days felt lighter. My work felt meaningful instead of draining. I paid my own bills on my own terms in a space that belonged to me. People around me didn't praise my endurance. They respected my boundaries. I didn't get an apology that fixed everything. What I got was something quieter and more permanent. I got my sense of self back. And that turned out to be the most lasting consequence of all. I didn't go back to being the daughter who held everything together at her own expense. I also didn't cut my family off like a dramatic ending in a movie. What I chose was something harder and quieter. I chose distance with intention. Over time, the rules changed. Conversations slowed down. Expectations softened. My dad no longer spoke in ultimatums because they stopped working. My mom learned that peace built on silence eventually collapses. My brother grew into his own responsibilities, not because he was pushed, but because there was no one left to carry them for him. And me, I stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was to people who never planned to protect me the same way. I built a life that didn't require permission, one that felt steady, honest, and fully mine. Looking back, that dinner wasn't the moment my family broke. It was the moment the illusion finally did. Sometimes walking away isn't about punishment. It's about refusing to keep shrinking so others can stay comfortable. If this story hit close to home, I want you to know you're not weak for wanting fairness, and you're not selfish for choosing yourself. If you've ever had to step back from family to protect your sense of self, share your experience in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if you want more real stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.